You're listening to The Edge with Mark Thompson.
John from the John and Ken show is here. John and Ken, for those who are not in L.A., they're a dominant afternoon drive talk team. And they're on the most listened to talk radio station in America, KFI Radio. So their show is insanely popular. And John's sort of the fire-breathing dragon of that show, of the two. You know, Ken's kind of the setup guy, and John comes in like a wrecking ball. And John and I disagree on a ton of things, but wow, I respect his ability to communicate well and to package stuff in an entertaining and, as I say, effective way. I wish I was that good, you know? So that's the bulk of this episode. We'll start with the Fast 15, politics and more, but there's no politics really to speak of in my conversation with Michael Shure, our political correspondent. Actually, Michael and I talk about meeting celebrities and being intimidated by your heroes or those moments when you actually meet that person that you've dreamt of meeting. I think you'll like the conversation. That's the first 15 or 16 minutes of the show, and then it's all John. Those of you who have been so kind as to hit our virtual tip jar on our website, edge-show.com, and send us money, we love you and appreciate you. And if you want to be loved and appreciated by us, there's a PayPal link on our website, edge-show.com. And again, I love everyone who listens to this show, but there's a little extra love for those who have stepped up that way. I mean, if we were inundated by floodwaters, all of you would be welcome at my home. But the first people in would be those who hit the PayPal link and left something on our website, edge-show.com. That's all I'm saying. It's always a great surprise when somebody sends us something and supports our show, so thank you. The other way you do that is through our Amazon link at our website, edge-show.com. There'll be an Amazon banner. When you click on an episode, it'll say Buy Amazon or something about Amazon. Just click on that. That's a hot link. It'll take you right to Amazon, same Amazon as you'd normally be on, but because you clicked through our site, we'll get a little piece of whatever you spend. We have no idea what you bought. We have no idea how much you spent. It just comes at the end of every month to us, a little piece of what all the people who click through on Amazon spent. So again, go to their website through our website, edge-show.com. You can subscribe to the show on YouTube now. You'll get notifications as to when there are new episodes. You can also, of course, on iTunes, on Stitcher, and a few other places I can't think of right now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the support. Those of you who've stepped up and shown us support, wow, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Let's get started.
This is The Edge.
The advantage, it means.
Hey, look, I just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is there a dash?
Time for the Fast 15, politics and more. He is Michael Shure, everybody.
Hey, how are you?
All right.
It's good to see everybody.
Great to have you here, Michael. And I'd like to start with something we're kind of talking about before we started and just kind of continue. We're talking about the aura around celebrity. Sometimes you don't want to meet your heroes. You often hear that. You don't want to meet your heroes.
Well, my heroes are first responders, but
Right, I forgot.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
But you were saying when you were growing up, your hero was a baseball player.
When you're a boy, he plays for the Yankees as first baseman, Chris Chambliss. My room was covered with Chris Chambliss, the New York Rangers, Genesis, but it was shrine-like to Chambliss, and he was the Yankees' first baseman, and I played first base when I was a kid, not very well, but he was my player, and so I guess that would rise to hero.
I say hero.
No, I know what you mean.
It's a kid's crush.
Of course.
It's a man.
Right.
But if it's Phil Collins and Chris Chambliss appearing at the same time, you can only see and meet one of them. Who do you?
That's interesting. Well, now that I have met both of them, I would definitely meet Phil Collins.
Okay, but at the time,
it would have been Chris Chambliss.
You hadn't met Chris Chambliss.
Yeah.
And there was a card show, one of those signing shows, right?
Yeah, and this was sort of at the dawn of when that became a real thing. And I collected baseball cards, and you get the sort of the monthly, it was called Sports Collectors Digest, and they would, you'd get it, and you'd look, and you'd send, $1.50 in coins in an envelope to somebody so they could send you, a Vita Blue card. And we
Vita Blue was a pitcher.
So there was there was an announcement that Chris Chambliss would be appearing somewhere in New Jersey, and I don't remember the town, and he would be signing things. So, boom, obviously, I called my friend Fig, and I said,
how old are you at this point?
I'm in the
30?
Yeah, 38. I was, probably in my teenage years.
Okay, so this is like really manna from heaven.
Yeah, this was exciting, and so we drove out to
you and Fig drove
to the card show, and it was as depressing as any card show is, because nothing, even when you're a collector, is more depressing than a card show. It's usually just people sitting behind desks trying to rip kids off, and so you walk in, and then there's this table, and you pay $5 or $10, and you have your item that you can buy a bat, you can bring cards, and you pay for each signature that you're going to get from Chambliss. And I had a Yankees program from 1977, the year after he hit the big home run. He hit a big home run to bring the Yankees to the World Series, bottom of the ninth at the Yankee Stadium. So I had, and the next year was the cover of the Yankees yearbook. I bring it to the front of the line. I'm waiting online. I can't believe, he's sitting right there. It's very exciting. And I get there, and you don't know what you're going to say, so I said, hey, I have something to the effect of, hey, Mr. Chambliss, I'm your biggest fan, which I think I stole from the guy in front of me, who stole it from the guy in front of him, and I just love watching you play, and I play first base, and whatever. Anyway, he was nice. And so I handed him my thing, and he wrote Chris Chambliss on it.
But the whole exchange takes 15 seconds.
Yeah, it takes 15 seconds. And I was just the fact that it said Chris Chambliss on it was so disappointing. It was so deflating to me. It wasn't, Dear Michael. He didn't ask me what my name was.
Yeah, which typically they do.
They do, right? If you're paying. But although in the sports world, if it says to Michael on it, it diminishes its value, so there's a little bit of that. But I didn't know that then. And I said, can you personalize it? I think is what I said. And he said, what's your name? And I said, Michael. And to his signature, he added, to Michael. It wasn't to Michael, thanks for coming out here, thanks for all your support, thanks for being my biggest fan, Chris Chambliss, home run, New York Yankees, number 10, nothing like that. It was just to Michael. I still have it. It says to Michael, Chris Chambliss. And I walked away really defeated. I was really upset by that. But the ride home with Fig, we talked about how, what did I expect from this guy? He was he was supposed to be the quiet guy in the locker room, which is why he appealed to me as a fan. He wasn't like Reggie Jackson fighting with Billy Martin and everything. He was Chris Chambliss. But So
you're saying, in a sense, his lack of engagement, if you will, or the brevity of the entire experience from the standpoint of your back and forth is sort of consistent with who he was.
No, that's true. Yeah, exactly. It was like waiting on a long line for a roller coaster that lasts 14 seconds, and you're like, oh, why did I just do that? And that's sort of how I felt. I didn't know what I wanted to get out of it, and I don't know that my mind was mature enough to think about that, but it certainly wasn't what I did get.
What did Fig get?
Fig got the pleasure of buying some cards, and I don't know that he bought anything from Chris. He was an Astros fan, so he was originally from Houston. So if it had been Craig Biggio or at that time Jose Cruz, it would have been different. But it was interesting because it's a phenomenon that happens, I think, to young boys too. When you meet your heroes, and you say that loosely, but it's usually deflating. And you were saying it's better off there are people that you just soon not meet because of that.
Yeah, I think it really is true what they say. That it's you don't want to meet your heroes,
right?
Because you have created an image that they can't possibly live up to. It's not their fault.
Right, right.
It's not always that they're jerks or anything. It's just that they aren't. You've deified them in a sense. You know what I mean? And obviously they're a more complete person than just that deification would allow.
Totally, I agree. And you mentioned Phil Collins. I met Phil Collins coming out of a sushi bar. We were both in the sushi bar, and we were waiting at the valet for our cars. This was another 20 years ago. I wasn't going to do the Chris Chambliss thing, but I was going to say something because I did like him. I said, "Hey Phil, thanks for the music." And he said, "Hey, my pleasure." And that was it. And that was
That's
our whole
cool.
exchange.
That's a nice thing.
And that was all I needed out of that,
Right.
you know. I have Chris Chambliss to thank for that.
Yeah, right.
I waited remember when there was Brentano's at Century City?
Sure.
Jimmy Carter was there. And so I bought his book and waited online. And he signs J. Carter in all his books, right? And I was sort of next, and there's a handler who you hand the book to, and that person hands it to the president. And so I said, is there any way he would sign Jimmy Carter to me? And she said, no, he just signs how he signs it. And they hand the book to him. I go in front. I said, Mr. President, so nice to meet you. And he signs the book, and he signs Jimmy Carter, and he looks up at me and winks.
That's so
cool.
cool.
And so in that moment,
oh my God,
he
that's
did
the
what Chris
greatest
Chambliss didn't do. You know?
That's the greatest story.
Yeah, it was great.
That's
that was
a great story.
Yeah.
We're talking about celebrity and the aura of celebrity. I mean, there are a lot of situations, as you can imagine, here in Hollywood. Just last night, Blake Griffin was standing right next to me.
Right.
And he was there with a couple of his buddies.
The basketball player.
He was a star for the Clippers, and he's on tons of TV commercials.
Does he still play?
No, he's been traded away from the Clippers.
To the other team.
To the team that's not the Clippers.
Right.
And I didn't say anything to him. And I've interviewed him before, but I just felt like, don't be that guy. Just, you know.
Right. Like, I wouldn't say something to someone who I have zero connection with, but I know that they're famous. Like, I wouldn't do that.
But like what I liked about Blake Griffin is when I interviewed him, I did a little.
You did
I did a little joke.
Right.
But I didn't tell him it was going to be a joke, and so you have to really kind of be tuned into the sarcasm. And this is a guy who gets interviewed over and over and over again. I feel for these guys who are besieged. Now they make jillions of dollars.
Right.
I mean, I understand it's part of the gig, but still, if you wanted to tune out of an interview, you could. And sort of put it on autopilot. So when I come in with sarcasm that I'm not advertising ahead of time, you have to be connected to get it.
Unquestionably. Yeah.
And he did, and he really played along with it, and it was pretty funny. And it helped put a button on the interview that was interesting, because otherwise it's just, you know, Blake Griffin, Blake likes to do this, Blake likes to do that, and, you know.
Totally.
Yeah. But I felt like, dude, just leave it alone.
Yeah. No, I know.
I was going to say, hey, man, I'm sure you don't remember, but, you know, years ago we did an interview. You were just so terrific, and I really, that really set you apart from so many athletes.
And what does that accomplish, though, right? I mean, like, you're never going to be best friends with him, and
It's what happened with Russell Wilson. You know, I told you the story about Russell Wilson wanting to meet me.
I don't remember.
Quarterback for the Seahawks. So I do the voiceover for a show that he was hosting.
Right.
And he said, I really want to meet that voiceover guy. And I get this from my pal who is, as it turns out, I happen to know him because he was the floor guy for my show when I hosted the show, right? So the same guy who was flooring that is flooring this show that I'm doing the announce for. And he says, hey, can you come out of the booth and say hi to Russell? He really wants to meet you.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that is so cool, because I love him. I mean, he's just everything great. You know,
except that he's a Seahawk and I'm a 49er.
He runs, he throws, he's unbelievable. He's like that one-man highlight reel, right?
Right.
So,
like you are.
Yeah, right. So we had that, and I go down there, and he's not there. He's on like a break, and my pal says, "You know, he's on a break. Come back down, though." And then he hits me again. He goes, "Hey, Russell's still asking about you. Can you come down?"
Right.
I think he wants to shoot something with you. And I'm thinking, wow, this is unbelievable. So Russell Wilson is asking to meet me, and he wants to shoot something with me. This is extraordinary.
Right.
I couldn't get away from the booth right at that moment. Minutes before the show starts, I run down to meet Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
And I had this conscious thought, and it's what we're talking about. This cannot get better than it is right now.
Right, that's
Russell
true.
Wilson has asked to meet me repeatedly.
Right.
He wants to shoot something with me for whatever his show or whatever the thing is that he's shooting for. By meeting him, I will only be disappointed, because he's not going to say, and this is what made me think of it, hey, Mark, you know what? I don't know if you have plans this weekend, but Sierra and I are going out to the desert, and we thought maybe you'd like to come with us.
Right.
You know, we got a seat on the plane.
Right.
You should come by. So nothing substantively is going to make this better.
Yeah.
Stop now. Don't go meet him. I had this thought.
Right.
Which is absolutely soundly reasoned, 100% true.
Yeah.
Still, I had to meet him. As I say, because I just think he's amazing in what he does on the field. I continue down this long hallway that's flanked by all these security people, you know, and I've got a credential, except I can't obviously walk into Russell Wilson's dressing room. I knock on the dressing room door, and there's another huge dude who comes to me like, these guys just keep getting bigger and
They're
bigger.
linemen. He just travels with his offensive line.
And he says, yes. And I said, yes, I'm Mark Thompson. I'm the announcer on the show. And so I was told to come to his dressing room. And I was told.
Right.
My pal said, hey, he said, just go to his dressing room. He said, wait one moment. So I'm waiting. And the whole time I'm thinking, you know what, dude, just bail on this. This is humiliating. What if he says he doesn't want to?
Standing and waiting by the dressing room door is just, it doesn't get more pathetic than that. Yeah.
So I'm feeling how pathetic that is. And then the guy says, yep, Russell wants to see you. Come on in. So I go in, and it is a huge area with kids throwing stuff back and forth. And, like, I'm talking about little kids, like 6, 7, 8 years old.
Right.
I mean, it looked like a jamboree or something.
And it was that big a room?
It was pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this guy comes out, and he's wearing the Seahawks jersey.
Right.
And he comes out and he goes, hey, nice to meet you. And I said, hey, pleasure to meet you. I said, guy, you're really great on the show. It's really a pleasure. And it was just clear to me. He didn't say, you have time to shoot something. It was also, to be fair, like 3 minutes to showtime.
I see.
So I picked it. But I had to go. It was like I had to meet him. So we got a selfie, and that was it.
That was all. And so was he just being courteous, do you think? Like, hey, I want to be nice to everybody on the show?
No, because he made too big a thing, but he was being courteous at that moment, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's where he was being courteous.
Right.
Like, yeah, I wanted to meet you like an hour and a half ago, and
The
when I had
feeling
time
went
to
away,
do shit.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but now...
Yeah.
Anyway, this Mike Pompeo appointment, we're horribly out of time. I wanted to ask you, though, what about Mike Pompeo? Give us just the book on him real quick.
He's somebody who loathes the Iran nuclear deal. He is somebody who is, steeped in deep Christian belief and anti-Muslim belief.
By the way, he's so steeped in Christian belief that he believes in what?
He believes in
the rapture.
The rapture, yeah. He believes in the rapture, that's what everyone's waiting for, which...
I mean, a lot's been made of that. I don't know if it's legit to make something of that.
I just think that in this day and age, when you have an anti-Muslim stance and you are opposed to what has been a successful thus far peace process, it's bad news. And, he's somebody who's now the Secretary of State, our chief diplomat, and he believes in the rapture, and he's anti-Muslim. That says a lot to me.
Tell me something I can be encouraged by.
See what can be something about which to be optimistic.
How's the military parade coming? Is that going to happen soon?
I forgot all about the military
I love
parade.
a parade.
Yeah, I know you do love a parade.
All right. Listen, next time I want to talk about the military parade.
We'll talk about it every single Edge show.
You can follow Michael Shure.
Yeah, I'm at Michael Shure. It's a tough one.
Shure, like the microphone,
right,
Shure.
like the microphone.
Are you related to the microphone people?
I wish that I was. No, I'm not. My dad used it to get into a restaurant in Chicago once where the company's based. He made a reservation for Shure. Couldn't get a reservation at a steakhouse. They said, what's your name? We'll put you on the wait list. He said, Michael Shure. And he said, Mr. Shure? He said, yes. Come in right now. It's like, it was the Palm in Chicago, and my dad loved telling that story.
Nice. Yeah. Very nice. Michael Shure, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael.
If you enjoy listening to The Edge, support them by subscribing to The Edge on iTunes, Stitcher, and you can listen through the iHeartRadio app. Get busy listening.
A second go-round with a guy who is still the reigning champion for downloads of an episode. No one has had more downloads on this show than this guest. He is John Kobylt. Oh, I had applause for you, but I screwed it up. I'll post it in later. John Kobylt, everybody.
Should I applaud myself?
John, you were a big hit here last time.
Way to start by putting a lot of pressure on.
One of the things we talked about last time that continues to be an issue in this country and we'll revisit is, well, immigration is the issue I'm thinking of, but your own personal story is a really cool one. I mean, you're the son of a guy who was a true working class immigrant and who really suffered under a Nazi regime in Europe and fled that regime, right?
Yeah, he was captured when he was 14. And taken to a Nazi work camp. And I think last time I was here, I told you the story that he had a brief stay at Auschwitz where they had to determine whether he was Jewish or not. And that was a 3-judge informal panel looking at the size of his nose.
He did the Nazi work camp, and I was giving you a hard time that, my parents would constantly bring that up, and you said he didn't bring it up much.
No, he didn't talk much, and actually, one of my sons brought that up the other day. It's amazing. I mean, I lived at home for 22 years, and he only died about 5 years ago, so I knew him a long time, my dad. Never really occurred to me that the reason he didn't speak much is he knew very little English. I know that sounds like ridiculous, but yeah, that's why he didn't talk much. He just didn't know how to put together a paragraph. So everything was grunts and 2, 3, 4-word bursts. I do remember him talking in Polish at length with my mother But I just never connected until my son pointed it out. It's like, well, that's why he was so quiet.
And you never picked up Polish while you were a kid?
No, there were some words and phrases, a couple of prayers.
Now,
I could still do about half of the Our Father in Polish.
So go back to the Auschwitz thing. So when he's standing there, or whatever.
Well, he's 14, and it wasn't until like my sons turned 14 that I looked at them and I said, "Oh my God, my dad was this age and about this size when bad guys break in and carry him away from his family." He was just an ordinary kid. He played soccer in the neighborhood, went to school, worked on his parents' farm. And now he's being judged at Auschwitz to see if he was going to go into the gas chambers. And then they decided he was Catholic, which he was. And then they sent him to a farm camp in Germany. And for 4 years, he did hard labor on the farm camp, although he said that the woman who owned the farmhouse was really nice to him. A lot of the German families had to go along with what was going on, but they didn't really want to torture and beat up, the young men and women who were captured. So, the Germans had ordered this family to make these guys work on the field, but she treated them well, which made it somewhat palatable, I guess. After a while, you get used to anything.
Sure. It's just wild when you think about that refugee experience. You know what I mean? I mean, it's profound. And yet he came here, reconstituted his life as a working class guy.
Well, I guess that's why I don't have a lot of patience. And it was just instinctive in me. And then after a while, I started analyzing it. It's like, I had a dad who suffered way worse than any of you.
Sure.
And he never talked about it and never complained about it and just went to work every day. And he built a house and a family and a couple of cars, and we'd go to the beach a few times in the summer, and he was satisfied with that.
It was a normal American life.
And I grew up on a block with friends and neighbors whose dads, while they didn't have that story, they were all kind of like that. It was just all business. They went to work every day, and the kids went to school. Women were generally, homemakers. And I don't remember a lot of bitching and complaining. And so that culture of the complaint culture really irritates me.
No, I know. That's one of the things that really gets you. Like you just become sort of a signature of your attitude on certain issues. And you also, I've heard you express sympathy. In other words, you understand that people end up in situations, a chance plays in, bad breaks play in.
Oh, yeah.
But your irritation clearly is informed by that stuff we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, bad stuff happens, but generally, if you've got any kind of a character, any kind of a drive, you get out of it. It shouldn't go on and on and on, and you shouldn't be constantly talking about it and have that define your life,
And so what's implied there is sort of like, in this cultural experience now, there's more marinating in the problems as opposed to...
Marinating is a great word for it. Yeah, it is marinating, and there's no desire to stop marinating. In fact, marinating, it gives you some kind of social currency. Now you're cooler and more righteous than everyone else, and it is about as off-putting as anything I've ever experienced in my life. It's like, who wants to marinate in why you were a loser or why something bad happened to you? And you think you're unique? One thing, we traveled a lot, and you go around the world, we've got it made here. I mean, the poorest people in this country, outside of, people living in the street, have got it way better than 90% of the rest of the world. People here don't even know what they have. And they're yelling about constantly being oppressed and discriminated. And it's like, this is about as good as it gets, considering the limits of human nature, which will always be there.
Obviously, this is a first world experience living in America, and you do travel a lot to other first world countries. Okay, leave aside now the places where people are clearly, they're destitute to the point that they'd be happy living on the street in America. How do we stack up to other first world countries?
Well, there's more freedom here. There's more of a sense of, hey, you're on your own, figure it out. That's pretty much been the national philosophy up until recent years. So that's going to produce a certain amount of people who can't figure it out. I don't think that's a terrible thing, because the alternative is some of the European socialist countries where, oh, you didn't figure it out. Poor boy, here, we'll take care of you forever. It's a different philosophy, and it produces a lot of greatness and a lot of success. I mean, look at what we produce in the world, how we change the world. That is directly connected to the freedom and the lack of a nanny state. because the boneheads in government, like in Sacramento, they're not going to produce the technological revolution. They're not going to produce Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, right? You're not going to get that out of Kevin DeLeon. You're going to get it out of these guys who were allowed to follow the strangeness of their brain and their own bizarre path because there were no rules. There was no restrictions on them. They weren't trapped by class. They weren't trapped by their ethnic background. They just went and did what they want and they were geniuses.
Do you think, as the arguably wealthiest nation on earth, is there a responsibility to take care of our public in some way, though? Are you bashing all social programs, or no? I don't think you would.
No, limits. I think Bill Clinton over 20 years ago said, we're ending welfare as we know it, because at the time welfare was, hey, lay back on the couch and watch Oprah, checks will always come. And they came up with a program. It's like, within 5 years, you got to be working full time. Now, why is that unreasonable? And I think in California, somewhere along the line, they loosened those requirements. And it's like, why would you do that? If you can't figure out how to dig out of your hole in 5 years, it means you don't want out of your hole. You want the freebies. And that kind of behavior makes me crazy. It's like, get up and do something. It's not that hard. I mean, I see guys spinning signs on street corners, all right? At least they're spinning signs. Every time I see that guy, I go, okay, he's not at home waiting for a check.
It's one of these issues, that's something that you care about, that irritates you, and it also is informed by that tough immigrant experience. Like a guy who had nothing, who put together a family that did well.
My parents had every excuse in the world to be face down in the street. If my dad had ended up in America and he spent all his days drinking and beating us, everybody has said, well, look what he went through in Germany. Look what the Nazis did to him, right? My mother came from two alcoholic parents, all right, who were face down on the couch, who didn't work. And she had to go to work, she and her sister, when they were in their mid-teens. And in fact, her sister didn't even finish 8th grade. And they supported the family, and they had to clean up after their parents' messes and care for them. And these people were drunks, and they were sick, and they were irresponsible. She never complained about that, all right? And she could have been a complete whack job too, but she wasn't. So I had two people whose, if they told you their stories, your hair would stand on end, all right? And they weren't perfect people. I'm not lionizing them. We had problems, all right? They were overprotective. They weren't very curious about life. They were really old world people. But, the good part of them was, like, they worked every day. They took care of us every day, and there just wasn't any complaining. There wasn't any self-pity. They thought they had made it, that because of their own work, they had made it out of the depths of despair and created something good for their life and something good for me and my brother. And I don't hear people talking like that anymore. Obviously, people live like that, but it's not part of the national conversation anymore. In fact, if you say it, you're scolded. And I'm sure there's an ist or a phobe word to be used against that kind of thinking. It pisses me off to no end.
They had a sense of responsibility, is what you're
essentially saying. It was stuff you'd never questioned. The phrase sense of responsibility is considered controversial, incendiary now. It's like, take care of yourself. Why is that so difficult? People always did. I mean, in cave times they did, right? Sometimes I think the primitive tribes probably had a better sense of society and responsibility than we do now.
Well, they certainly had fewer options.
Yeah, right.
Back then.
Yeah, you had no choice.
Right.
And I think that's the thing. All the welfare social programs when you give people choices to not work, to not climb your way out of it, to not take responsibility, well, some are going to take the other option.
One of the big problems we have here in L.A., and you talk a lot about it, is the homeless issue. This is in Southern California we're talking about. For those who are listening from other parts of the country, this homeless problem, it shows itself in every community. But here in L.A., it's become a front and center issue. And let's review a little bit of what's been done. Certainly we can identify those things that haven't worked, right? And then what might be a strategy to at least put a dent in it.
Well, the first thing is they should identify the source of the people coming here. I'm convinced a lot of these people are coming from outside Southern California, outside the state. I think there's a critical mass that are coming here, either on their own or they're getting put on buses.
Because life here for a homeless person is better than elsewhere.
I think people have this idea in their heads that homeless guys don't know what's going on in the world. They do. A lot of them have phones, government phones. they can get the internet. They have a lot of free time. So they read and they watch. And they know that California is beautiful and warm. And they know that California is made up of a bunch of suckers who are going to give them some kind of benefits, or at the very least, leave them be so they can live in these tent communities. We went to a few of those tent communities. Those people there are not unhappy. They don't come up to you and say, please help me, please. No, it's like, leave us alone. We're busy shooting up in here, okay?
The tent communities, you did a live broadcast from there.
From several of them, because we went to the one in the Santa Ana Civic Center. We went to Skid Row. And these become real families and real communities, neighbors. They have nice tents, okay? I'm not saying that sarcastically. They steal the good tents from Target, okay? And they've got really nice tents, and they sit in there, and they sleep, and they read, and they drink and have their drugs, and they have sex. You know, they're the men and the women, they act like any other community. And what they don't have is they don't have any worries, no responsibility. They don't have sick kids, bad grades, wife nagging at them, husband bellowing all over the place. They don't have any bills to pay. They don't have to deal with traffic. It's not that bad, okay?
It's a pretty good pitch so far.
Right? And you're in a haze, you know? You've got that buzz going on all day, either from the pot or the heroin or the booze. The idea that they're writhing in misery and this is an immoral episode in America is just ridiculous.
Okay, wait a minute, though. They're dangerous places, right? You wouldn't say...
Me, because I value safety and peace and order and all that. They deal with it. Like any town, they know who the bad guys are, right? And they're on watch. And maybe they get rousted and have their stuff stolen, and that's just part of the game. So the next day you go out and you steal another tent from Target. It's not as traumatic because they're used to it. It's like just you living in a kind of a bad neighborhood. But you notice people in bad neighborhoods, a lot of them aren't really motivated to leave those either. People get used to their environment, and sometimes leaving the environment is just simply too much work.
There are people who end up, though, in those camps who don't want to be there, right? Did you meet any of them? I mean, there's a guy loses his job, then he goes to the next job, loses that job. I mean, or gets sick and loses a job. It's not always losing a job because you didn't do the job.
They lost their job, and we've all lost jobs. I'm thinking this through. You lose the job. What do you do the next day? You call up everybody you know, and let's say you work in retail, right? You lose your job in retail. It's almost impossible not to get a new job in retail in about 10 minutes because there's like 10,000 retail shops nearby. What happens on day 1, 2, day 10, day 30, especially in this economy? And the thing is, with this economy, what there is a lot of are low-end jobs. There's an inexhaustible supply of low-end jobs, which is why they've allowed so much illegal immigration, because they claim they didn't have enough Americans to fill all these jobs. So I just don't believe it in a lot of cases. I think, why did they lose their job? Drinking too much? Maybe that was it. And then they go around telling everybody, oh, yeah, I got fired. It was really bad. It's like they didn't tell them that they showed up drunk 5 days in a row.
Well, that's one scenario. I mean, there's also downsizing and all the other reasons that people lose jobs, that the company is consolidating. And
how many people in broadcasting have you known that were downsized and fired?
I mean, that's kind of the routine.
Okay. How many of them are on the street? You and I have been fired from jobs. We never spent a day on the street, although I actually spent 3 hours in my car once. But I don't accept it. My dad lost several factory jobs because the factories were already starting to close back in the 70s. We weren't on the street. And you know the thing was, we never felt frightened that we would be on the street. I knew my dad was going to get another job. I knew my mom would go to work full-time if she had to. There was this sense that if you and you know, he did. He called his friends. He called relatives because they all worked in factories. And he'd get hired at his friend's place.
Well, what's happening in L.A. is that these areas that have homeless encampments, they're spilling over into homeless people sleeping in their cars, homeless people sleeping on the street. In other words, the homeless problem is expanding beyond the encampments. They're moving the encampments. They're disassembling them.
If you have a huge inflow, you're never going to catch up. There's no solution to this. And I think there are a lot of people coming here. And those rehab clinics, oh my God, that is the devil's work. Because the rehab clinics, a lot of them are illegal. Half of the ones in Orange County are illegal. The other half are legal, but only because they have a license, right? Only because they paid the fee. And a lot of these people are coming in, they're getting their insurance drained, their insurance mills. 6 months it covers. This is increased, not coincidentally, when Obamacare kicked in, and it required insurance companies to cover drug rehab treatment, which everyone thought was a good idea. What they didn't account for is the drug rehab industry is largely unregulated, and there's all kinds of bad guys in it. So they said, oh, drug rehab is required? We get 6 months of insurance for free, and there's no requirement to actually cure the addiction? Well, what do you think is going to happen? This is where they pass things, and they don't think them through. Well, what is the worst-case scenario if you mandate rehab coverage? Well, this is the worst-case scenario. And they're running commercials on television all over the East Coast. And you've seen them, right? The piano, the violin, shots of the beach. And here at Sunset Gardens, we know that your issues are overwhelming. But with our trained staff of rehab experts, we will give you your life back, and we're covered by insurance. In fact, under this wacky insurance law, the day you step in California, the day you're immediately covered. And California is required to give you rehab coverage insurance. How nuts is that? You only have to be here an hour. So they're tossed out on the street after the 6 months. They're not cured. And then there's guys roaming around these towns. They know where the rehab clinics are, and they have their whole tray of drugs to get people re-addicted all over again. That's going on in Orange County by the hundreds. Hundreds of rehab clinics are involved in this racket.
The illegal rehab clinics that you talk about, how do they exist if they're operating illegally?
You and I could do this. We could buy a suburban house and open it up.
Oh, I see. You're saying it just house addicts.
Sure. Yeah, we just invite addicts in. We tell them we have a program, and they come in, and we don't really have a program.
But we can't use their insurance money, right? I don't understand how the fraud proceeds to the point where they're making money.
Because you use their insurance money.
You do use their... How do you use their insurance money if you're not licensed to be a rehab clinic?
Because nobody's regulating it. Everyone's faking it. They're pretending that they're a rehab clinic, and nobody's checking it out.
I see.
You know,
the insurance company doesn't
apparently not.
I see. I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware that there were so many illegal.
There's a tremendous amount of illegality. The rehab industry basically bought off everybody in Sacramento, and because of federal privacy laws, nobody can even interrogate and investigate the patients to see how it went. You can't. The HIPAA laws protect them. There's three different governments that are all at odds with each other. There's a lot of payoffs from the industry, and you have mandated insurance coverage. It is the worst mess imaginable. If you don't write regulations and laws airtight, the worst people in the world will always rip it wide open and exploit it.
So is there a way to put a dent in this problem of homelessness? It sounds like you keep identifying the inflow as a huge issue.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a way to stop that or reduce that? How could you? You can't.
Build a wall on it.
That's what I mean. Right. I mean...
Well, I think, you know what you do with these guys when you pick them off the street is say you're not going to live here anymore. Okay. Now and this is what you have to do under the radar. Since everyone else is working under the radar, what police departments have to do under the radar, which is what they do in Beverly Hills. In Beverly Hills, you don't see people. Why? Because under the radar, they put you in the police car and they say, "Where do you want to go? Your choice, or we'll take you somewhere." And you can coerce people and say, "Where's your family? Where'd you come from? What state did you live in? Are you married? Do you have kids?" Kind of emotionally appeal. Hey, maybe you should go back to your family. Maybe you should go back to your wife. The great test case, the greatest thing that happened in Orange County, what Todd Spitzer and the Board of Supervisors did down there, is they actually did a census of all the vagrants out in the Santa Ana riverbed. And they found out that about half of them want no help. No drug rehab, no alcohol rehab, no mental health clinic. They were offered everything. And they don't want shelters. And that's another thing. They don't want a home. They don't want a shelter because a shelter has rules. You can't drink and do drugs, among other things. They want to drink and do drugs.
Yeah, well, there are all these different kinds of shelters, right? There's the dry shelter, the wet shelter.
Well, they've come up with this new thing. Apparently, it's been around a few years, and we'd never heard of it. a wet house.
Right, the wet house.
You get them off the street. You put them in, again, a residential house in a normal middle-class neighborhood.
But they can drink.
They drink and do all the drugs they want and creates all kinds of mayhem. You have fights. You have prostitution. You have all kinds of bad guys coming and going. People are standing and leering at your daughter and smoking cigarettes and all. Oh, yeah, and you can't do anything about it. So all their ideas are stupid because they don't want to accept that people, the hardcore, and it could be a third or half of them, choose this life.
So you're saying, so you scoop these people up. I mean, that's a lot of scooping because there are a lot of people.
Well,
and you
got a big problem because you let this go on too many years.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the immigration situation. If you actually had a tight border, you wouldn't have to do any deportations. So, I'm kind of like had it up to here with letting a problem fester for 20 years and then say, oh, it's too big. There's nothing you can do. It's like, F you.
Yeah. The immigration problem, I know that that's something that you care passionately about. The net flow, as you know, has been not into California. It's now out of California, right?
Well, the net flow of people is out of California to other states. And these aren't immigrants. These are Americans. Mostly middle-class Americans have packed up and left other states because of all these quality of life issues, the traffic, the taxes, and other things. What is not examined, I guess this is not PC to examine, is there's about 850,000 illegal immigrants living in Los Angeles. And it's a quarter of the population. Well, that's a quarter of the traffic, too. That's a lot of the public schools. And that's a lot of housing. Now, we're talking about all the big problems in L.A. What does everybody say? Oh, the traffic is terrible. Well, yeah, the traffic is terrible because you allowed 850,000 people in here who don't have any legal right. Wow, housing's just impossible. It's like, gee, how much housing stock do you think 850,000 people take up? Wow, the public schools are awful. I can't send my kids. It's like, right. Well, look at that. You have 850,000, or you have tens of thousands of kids who can't speak English, all right? Everyone looks at the number of bodies that have come over, and they don't look at the secondary issues that really are primary issues in people's lives. Traffic, housing, schooling. They're disasters in L.A. in part because of excessive immigration. I mean, and everybody goes, oh, what do we do? What do we do? Well, I don't know what you do. You don't want to deport people, so I guess everybody's got to live like this, but we didn't have to.
The immigrant communities, though, overwhelmingly, the Latino communities specifically, are overwhelmingly making a contribution to the society, the culture. They're overwhelmingly employed. Their families assimilate. You know, in other words, there's a course towards sort of what your dad did minus the legal.
Because all that happens if you have an orderly number of people come in at a certain rate. You can take in X number a year, and it works. You can't take X times 10 or times 20 and have it work. It's the sheer numbers that have exhausted the system. And California spends $24 billion a year of tax dollars on illegal immigrants in all different ways. They produce about $2 billion in tax revenue. Clearly, that's a huge imbalance. And then you don't get the roads fixed. And then you don't get the schools upgraded. I mean, other states don't have these issues because they didn't have such a huge influx. But illegal immigration plays a big part in every major structural problem in California. You simply packed in too many people in too short a time, and they don't have a lot of skills in education, and they don't have a lot of money, and they have a lot of needs, and we overloaded. And the system has broken in 10 different ways.
One of the huge engines of California is agriculture, right? And that agriculture is driven by those immigrants who work those fields. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah, and you should have a program to do that. And they've had job programs, orderly immigration programs for that for decades and decades.
Although now what I'm seeing is that because of the crackdown on immigration, and of course it's really coming from the federal government more than even the state of California, that they're getting less of an immigration flow. They're having a rougher time getting people to work the field because they're worried about getting shaken down and booted out.
Yeah.
And they're having problems now filling those jobs. In fact, I saw something about how they had offered and employed a bunch of Americans. It seemed
Yeah.
like Americans wouldn't do these jobs. And they go, well, if you paid a living wage and decent benefits, maybe Americans would do that job. For 2 weeks, they had Americans working the job. And it was not just supposed to be a 2-week program. We want you here beyond 2 weeks. But none of the Americans lasted beyond 2 weeks. There is something about the grueling nature of that work that I guess most Americans want no part of it. They tapped out, after 2 weeks.
Well, because we have a very spoiled, coddled, entitled society. It's not the type of society that my parents grew up in, that I grew up in. So it's like, oh, that's too hard. That's too much work. That's a symptom of our social decay, that people don't want to do that hard work. If you go back 100 plus years, probably 150 years, 90% of families were farmers. They raised their own food that they ate because you didn't have food factories. You didn't have refrigeration, right? You grew your own stuff. So everybody did that work. The reason kids have summers off is because summers in those days is when the kids worked in the field. And you had a lot of kids because you needed a lot of farm hands. And then they had to take care of the parents when the parents got sick and old. Now, while that looks like primitive times, I think we've lost a lot of valuable qualities of life because now nobody works, nobody creates their own food, nobody cares for their parents. Everybody looks at their older parents as a burden instead of, this is an obligation you have. And so, now nobody wants to pick the grapes. Okay, so we import people. But even then, we don't pay them very much money. The exploitation of these people is horrible. They're working 12 hours a day in 110-degree heat for, $2 an hour or whatever it is. We treat them horribly. So I don't want to hear about the farming. And by the way, we don't really have farmers in California anyway. We have huge farming companies.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and those bastards torture these farm workers from Mexico and everywhere else. So I don't know.
I love to hear you at least mention this because I think the impression that somebody can get from you is that those immigrants, they're a burden. They don't contribute as much as they take, and that can be misconstrued because those who are working those fields, I just heard you say it, and it's obscene the way they're treated. These people are working very hard at the kind of hard work that you have talked about and celebrated in the growth of this country. And here these people are working these fields. They are the engine of the California economy in many ways, and they're totally treated like garbage. And they're threatened if they complain with, okay, well, I'm going to call the ICE agents.
Right.
And,
And that's why I got no patience for all the progressive politicians in Sacramento who are always lecturing everybody else. They don't do anything to force the farming industry to treat those people better. They don't care about those people.
Right. That's going on right under a progressive administration.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so and there's very little that any politician in either party cares about. They don't care about these issues, and they don't care about the people affected by the issues. I think they're in power because they enjoy the power of controlling other people. And that is their main driver.
There's something in California. We have this high-speed rail thing that's been going on forever. And even to those of us who crave a decent transportation system or even a public works program or however you want to view this thing, it seems like a colossal waste of money. This has been going on now for years, right?
10.
And the estimates for how much it'll cost are constantly being revised upward, and they're already astronomical. Mm-hmm. Now, this high-speed rail is to link Northern California and Southern California.
Well, the original plan that we voted on in 2008, there was an initiative, and this was the agreement. It would cost $33 billion, and you would get San Diego to Anaheim, L.A. to San Francisco, Sacramento. All right? That was for $33 billion. Now it's they'll admit to about $80 billion, I think. It really would be well over $100 billion.
Sure, they're constantly revising.
And there is no San Diego anymore. And there is no Sacramento anymore. And it's not high-speed rail anymore. It's not going to run at 200 miles an hour. For a lot of the track, it's going to run at 100 miles an hour. And you're not going to be able to get to San Francisco in 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's going to be 4 hours plus. So there's absolutely nothing that matters that is even close to the agreement we made.
Why is it so hard to undo that? To stop it?
because because we approved them to borrow $10 billion, and the Obama administration gave another $3 billion, and then this global warming tax that they rigged, they're sucking billions out of that, which is why they passed the thing to begin with. So there's lots of money to spend on all their friends, all these construction companies, engineering companies, lawyers, PR people. They've all contributed mightily to the campaigns. They're all connected. They're all friends. There's a gigantic bureaucracy. And now you have another parasite living on us.
And it's not, and as you say, this is not a party-specific problem. It doesn't matter who the party in power is.
No, the system, the democratic system, specifically in California, is been completely corrupted. It's a broken system. I would be happy with a dictator who didn't kill people coming in here. And I think we'd get more done if he was halfway intelligent. I'm serious. I think the voting patterns are absurd. I think most people have no idea what they're doing. They don't follow the news. A lot of the news they get is wildly distorted. They don't read what they're voting on. They don't know the candidates. They have very superficial, silly views on what's important in life. It's part of the whole degradation of society. It really is. You know, my dad, even with his limited English, sat and watched the news every night for an hour. And the news was serious from beginning to end. And he read the newspaper every day. People stare at stupid social media screens. And and I noticed this just doing the show about 5 or 6 years ago, that people were less engaged, less knowledgeable, reacting less. They listened, but they were not participating as much. It's changed in just the last few months, particularly in Orange County. Some kind of tipping point was
so people
reached.
are becoming sort of reinvigorated.
Yeah, between the gas tax and car tax increase, the absurd homeless situation in the riverbed, the Sanctuary City story, the three of those have come together at the same time and represented a moment where many said, all right, you've gone too far now. And so now there's a bit of an awakening. You know, Trump provoked a resistance, which then provoked a counter-resistance. And now people are getting more engaged.
So go ahead. Yeah.
No, but at least they're getting engaged on stuff that matters rather than getting engaged over some stupid tweet that he writes at 3 a.m. Here are issues that matter. You've got homeless tents, in front of your house. You're going to be paying another $800 a year in gas and car taxes. You've got criminal aliens being protected by the government, and they're not cooperating with the feds. Criminals, felons. That's too much, and it should be too much. But it had to get that far. Things you could not conceive of just 5 years ago have happened. And can you imagine 5 years ago? We're going to end up with 1,000 people in tents on the San Ana riverbed. Can you imagine we're going to have a government that actively goes out of their way to protect convicted, felon, violent, illegal alien criminals? It's like, what are you talking about? Well, that's reality.
The John and Ken show, you guys are when you think of activists, you think of a different line oftentimes, but I would say that's an activist radio show. You choose issues. You chose the gas tax, the homeless problem. You've chosen other issues along the way. I'm thinking of the police beating and killing of the Orange County.
Kelly Thomas.
Thank you, Kelly Thomas. So you choose these issues and you actually mobilize a tremendous amount of public support for these different issues that you guys have identified.
The most common comment we get from people, I didn't know this was going on. And that is an indictment of our entire culture, our generation of democracy, the whole system. With all the communication we now have, most people don't know what's going on. And so we can compress it. There's like one spot, because we're the only show that does it, this consistently on TV or radio or internet. There's one spot where people could find out what's going on. And so that's the key to the success.
The thing that you do, you'll call somebody, like you call the mayor of L.A.
Yoga pants.
Yoga pants. I mean, there's a there's almost a Trumpian nickname to some of the things that you know what?
Oh yeah,
right. And
we've always done that because you turn people into cartoon characters because that's what they are. Eric Garcetti isn't a serious leader. He isn't exactly Franklin Roosevelt. He's a silly man who cares more about his hair and his suit, and he preens.
You don't believe that? I don't.
Yes, I do.
I don't believe.
I do. I've actually.
Well, he's made changes in the city. I mean, he's beautified certain aspects of the city that were run down. I'm not. This isn't his whole administration, but it's not. He's not solely concerned with his look. I'm sure I hear what you're saying.
I guarantee you, he spends more time looking in the mirror than your girlfriend or my wife each morning.
Well,
and my wife spends a lot of time getting ready.
All right, so environmentalists is what I was getting to.
Yeah.
Because you have to appreciate how vulnerable the environment in California is, right? And how we've succumbed even with our existing administration. This is the so-called Democratic Progressive Administration in Sacramento. There's still plenty of stuff going on here in California along the lines of fracking.
They explain to me where all the environmentalists are when all the homeless people in the Santa Ana riverbed were unleashing thousands of pounds of feces, which eventually are going to get washed into the ocean. They never join our cause. They don't show up there at the riverbed. They're not part of the press conference saying, this has got to end because this is harming. This is harming. This is going to harm sea life.
Sure.
This is going to poison people who are going to be swimming. This is going to lead to hepatitis outbreaks. We get typhoid, cholera. God knows. They had a huge hepatitis outbreak in San Diego, so they don't show up. So that makes me go, well, why?
Why do I need to show up for them?
Right. No. It's like, why aren't you interested in that? Why are you interested in taking away plastic straws from me and not thousands of pounds of feces in a riverbed that washes to the ocean? The illegal immigration that goes on, right? Huge amounts of garbage are left behind. Huge amounts.
Agreed.
Not one environmentalist has ever shown up at the border and say, this is an atrocity. This is horrible. People have separated into weird cults, like weird religions, and they have certain provisions in their religion, and other provisions aren't there, and they don't discuss them, and they don't cross and meet the other side. I would take on face value that they really care about the environment, but I see all these glaring examples of environmental degradation that they don't care about, which makes me question, well, maybe they're just in it for the money, and there's more money in certain environmental issues and not others.
Oh, that's interesting. I have to say that I think that there's certain adjunct issues, like the ones you're talking, like where the environmental effect is sort of an adjunct to the homeless problem. But by the way, I think you make a very good point about the toxification of the environment through those homeless people who are, as you say, that flow of it, and it's unfiltered, it's unscreened, all that stuff that flows right out into the ocean.
And I also wonder, are they asking for some kind of purity that's not possible? We've got 7 billion people on the planet, and we do all have the right to be here too, as well as all the other creatures and all the other plants and all that. We're going to make a mess to a certain extent, and let's address the big messes that can be fixed. But I find that often there's an increasing intensity and hysteria over smaller and smaller and smaller issues because they need something to send out that fundraising letter with the big red headline. And it's clear that we've cleaned up the atmosphere tremendously from 40 years ago. But nobody stops and applauds that.
Yeah, in a way, there is no small stuff. It's like the broken window policies. It starts with a broken window, and then before you know it, the whole neighborhood is trashed. These straws that you talk about, I know you don't like the limits on plastic straws. I know you don't like the limits on plastic bags, but those things do end up in the wash also. And there's tons of sea life. They just found a whale last month rolled up on the beach, 60 pounds of those bags in its belly. And plastic, it doesn't biodegrade. It'll be there in the ocean, and now the ocean, as you know, worldwide is full of this plastic. Anyway, all I'm trying to say is, why not replace the plastic straws with straws that break down? Because clearly all the stuff's ending up everywhere. those straws are everywhere. So straws, bags, whatever, the plasticization of this world has been a bad thing environmentally. And yes, we have a right to be here, but we also, don't you think we want to try to minimize our impact, or at least balance our impact against those natural
I want to
ecological
see
things?
just how bad the straw situation is, because what we talked about this on the air, that they traced the research to a 9-year-old kid, okay, who created an estimate of the number of straws we use. I know in San Francisco they looked at the number of plastic bags in the garbage, and they found that it was 0.6% of the garbage that they pick up. So I wonder if these straw and plastic bag situations are wildly exaggerated. I mean, you talk about the one whale with the 60 pounds of plastic in him. Do all the whales have that? Or is it like the one whale they found, and then they're going to be waving that bloody flag for the
First
next
of all,
10
don't
years?
undersell 9-year-olds. They do some great research. But secondly, I think, yes, the latest stuff, I'll push stuff to you.
Well, send me all the hysterical sky is falling,
I'm going to put you
left-wing propaganda you can find.
I'm going to put you on some mailing lists. You're going to love it. No, but that plastic broken down, okay, it's pulverized, as you can imagine, with the waves and all the rest. That plastic is ending up in all marine life. That is to say, there is, even the fish that they serve you, if it's caught out of the ocean, it has plastic in it on a cellular level, on a microscopic level. But anyway, so I know that's an issue for you. I think some of the stuff is, hey, I don't want to be inconvenienced.
Yes.
I want what I want. And I feel like that is...
Because I throw out all my plastic straws. I have never driven to the ocean and dumped the plastic straws in there. So I think most people are responsible. I would like to track down these irresponsible people who are shooting the straws into the ocean.
If you go to the beach,
yeah,
you go to the beach here in Southern California, you can go to the beach in Santa Monica, you can go to the beach in Malibu. It's filled with straws, with crap. I used to walk the beach with a bag and pick it up because I used to walk the beach every day when I lived at the beach, just because I couldn't stand walking past it. It wasn't because I was trying to be a good Samaritan. It was just like it was disgusting. It's gross.
You're going to end up with needles in your heels.
That was the one thing I didn't find. I didn't find needles, but I found everything else.
Dirty diapers?
There's a website where they stuff that's washed up on the beach.com or some crap like that. And you'll see, washer dryers.
Some people.
Stuff falls.
Washer dryers?
Yeah, because stuff falls off of shipping containers or whatever. And it's, I mean.
Who brings that to the beach?
When you were here last time, we talked a little bit about how your career came up. And I actually got an email from someone saying, I wanted to re-listen. I'd forgotten that John was on your show once before, so I'm downloading and I want to re-listen. So it got me thinking about what we talked about the last time.
Yeah.
And that's when we talked about your career and you coming up and you meeting Ken. So people who are curious about that should go back and listen to that episode. But one of the things that was outstanding about that, I thought, was that you were in Atlantic City when Donald Trump was beginning his ascent in Atlantic City, the Taj Mahal and all that stuff. And so you had, you bumped into Donald Trump. You went to a couple of the openings of his casino, of his various endeavors.
Yeah, I didn't know him. My wife knew him a little bit because she covered him as a news reporter and did a series on him. So she had real conversations, and he actually called for her to get a recommendation to work at another station.
Oh,
so
I guess when I say you knew him, thank you for that, because I'd forgotten that she really did have.
She
a
really knew him.
Experience.
Yeah.
But I meant you knew of him during his ascent.
He dominated the news then, because at that time Ken and I had just gotten together, and we were transitioning from disc jockeys into talk show hosts. So we did a very talky morning show on 2 different stations in town. And Trump was the thing because he had 3 casinos at the time. He was opening the Taj Mahal, which was the most spectacular and garish. I thought the thing was ugly as hell. I mean, but the locals and the Chamber of Commerce, they thought this was the greatest thing ever constructed. It's like, oh my God, this is ugly. And nobody knew that it was a house of cards financially, that the whole thing was destined to crash in just a few years. Nobody knew that he had borrowed tons of money to do this. It's just that he did it, and he was employing a lot of people, and it brought back Atlantic City, because Atlantic City, we used to be one of the jewels on the East Coast for many years, and then it fell into total disrepair. I mean, complete collapse.
I mean, it was one of the epic falls because it was the Las Vegas. Remember, it's Las Vegas by the shore. It was beautiful. You know,
I mean we could do a separate hour just on the Atlantic City and all the terrible corruption. But there was a lot of corruption going on at the time. I mean, the mayor ended up in prison. Many of the council members ended up in prison. You know, all those corruption cases that all went on while we were there, or it started while we were there. And so Trump was larger than life. And in the middle of it, he had his affair with Marla Maples. Had Ivana working and living in one hotel, and Marla was stashed away in the other hotel. So it was tremendous material for the radio. And then he declares bankruptcy. I mean, he was. People forget, and I went and checked on this, but he was a nightly topic in Johnny Carson's monologue around 1990.
Sure.
All the jokes they're doing now, the first run of jokes happened almost 30 years ago.
Sure.
So
he was a personality, as you say, larger than life. That's exactly the right way to describe him, right?
He was in New York City in the 80s. He was in Atlantic City in the late 80s and early 90s. He was a television star, and he also was on a lot of talk shows. He was interviewed on news talk shows, constantly giving his opinion, often the same opinions he has today.
No.
I mean, I don't think all the political idiots, all the pundits and analysts understood how deeply embedded he was in everyone's consciousness. It was always a little bit under the radar, and everyone knew Donald Trump when he announced he was running.
Yeah, you're saying that imprinting over
right.
all those different venues that you just described.
And it was decades of a positive imprint, largely, because he was successful. He had beautiful women. He had big buildings. He had a television show. He was a compelling personality. That's what blindsided everybody in Washington. This guy was a big deal in much of America. He was widely admired.
Yeah. What are the things that are important about Trump, and what are the things that are just sort of distractions about Trump? I mean, I'm asking you because you did come up with him. Meaning, I'll give you one example. I was in New York, and I met, just by total happenstance, we're sitting next to this guy who's a regular visitor to New York. Turns out he's the top banker in Canada. Okay, he's the top financier for real estate in Canada, and he does some financing in the U.S. as well of these. I'm talking huge buildings. I mean, these Trump-esque buildings, right? And I was just asking him, oh, what about this? What about that? What about this project? He was telling me about that project he had. And I said, what about Trump? And I said, have you had any experience with loaning money? And he said, Trump is a total fraud. I would never go near anything with him from a business standpoint. I feel like people in the finance real estate world understood that about Trump. At least, again, and there are people who listen to this program who are Trumpies, and I mean it I'm just relating a conversation. But clearly, he had 6 bankruptcies and a lot of contractors he didn't pay and all that. I mean, come on, the guy's left a trail of tears behind him.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
He's not a good guy when it comes to business. I mean, not a straight-up cat. But how much is important, as you say, he's a guy who showed up on talk shows, who's almost a showman, entertainer more than a thinker,
Yes, that's absolutely right. And why is that a problem?
Okay.
What he seems to be very effective at sticking to his message, at continuing to push for the things he wants to accomplish, and not being derailed by criticism. He gets angry in the moment. He's very thin-skinned, and he erupts and says crazy things. But there aren't any issues that he's deviated from. And nobody has seen that before. Usually, most politicians at every level, if they get some blowback, they run and hide, and they just drop it. And they don't want the controversy, and they don't want the debate. And what I like about him the most is he doesn't care about that stuff. For example, the wall. Every week, he announces he wants to build the wall. Obviously, he's heard all the criticism. He knows the difficulties with Congress when both parties are against it. But he's sitting there every day. He goes, no, here's why we need it. And he'll go through the arguments again and again. And I've never seen that before. I like that a lot. If you should find a guy on your side who does that. That would be great for your side. Somebody to keep pushing it.
What I see on the left and I talk about this all the time. The left, we eat our young. Perfect is the enemy of the good, right?
Yeah.
Oh, but he said some sexist thing or whatever.
Oh, my God.
We throw them out.
I am so fed up with that. I don't care about what anybody said 10 years ago about anybody. And if those people want to eat their own over every random comment or joke or drunken tirade, it's like, good. Keep doing that. Consume yourselves. That's what you think is important about life? That everyone speaks just so at all times? I mean, it's just a bunch of babies, just a bunch of infants.
Well, the right falls in line. Look at how the right has fallen in line behind Trump. They all loathe Trump, probably. I mean, he's this impertinent guy who says all this stuff that is offensive. Those people who care about these issues that they say, I'm talking about the religious right and all the rest, they have to be offended by this. You'd think, but they fall in line. Why? Because they have the goal in mind. And the goal is we're going to replace all those justices and we're going to change legislation.
It's a much more sophisticated way of thinking.
Right.
You know, years ago, people had these litmus test issues. Well, if he said this or he's for that, then I'd never vote for him. And somewhere along the line, and maybe we had to go through George W. Bush and Obama, a lot of people realized, screw it. You know what? If this guy is going to get us here, I don't care what he said or what he's done or how he acts. It doesn't matter anymore because we've had all these polite people. We've had everyone who follows the rules and they go along with all the protocols and the niceties and the politically correct BS. And what does it get you? It doesn't get you anything. You don't get credit for behaving well. You only get destroyed for saying one thing once. And a lot of people are sick of that.
I agree. I mean, I think we run when no one's chasing us a lot of the time on the left. But now, of course, in the new media environment, everybody's chasing everybody all the time and trying to drive them out. Sean Hannity, as it turns out, he had, you could argue, a responsibility to disclose the fact that he had all these HUD grants.
There isn't one Hannity viewer who cares.
Exactly my point. He's staying the course just like Trump.
One of the overriding things which seems hard for a lot of people to understand, especially political geek inside people, is your set of issues that you prattle about all day and night on TV is not the set of issues that a lot of people care about. You can carry on, and you may be absolutely right, and my response is, I don't care. You're getting into a big froth here over something that's utterly irrelevant. Hannity's made hundreds of millions of dollars. What he's done with the money and who he's hired and what he owns, I don't care.
Sure.
And if I had that kind of money, I'd be buying up lots of real estate too, and why would you care what I do with it? It's not your business.
The thing with Hannity, of course, is that he rails against government and HUD, and then, of course, he has $5 million in HUD grants, and he has Ben Carson on, and he's praising Ben Carson. You know, you're praising the entity and guy who is responsible for you getting the checks. That's what people have an issue with. Not that he's buying real estate.
Who has an issue?
Yeah, right. Not Hannity viewers.
Right. Professional activists who've ginned up something that nobody in their right mind could possibly care about.
Well, I know they're professional activists, but I'll take your point that no Hannity viewer cares about it.
No.
You're not moving anybody on that. And that's what he knows.
Right.
You see,
and he sells his products.
Right.
The advertisers who advertise get big business from Hannity. So that's staying there. Of all the things wrong in the world, I mean, why don't you go after plastic straws? That would be a better use of your time. I mean, people are focusing and obsessing on minuscule trivia.
Well, the reason Sean Hannity's important, as you know, John, is because he is effectively, you could argue, the chief of staff to the President of the United States. He has got a pipeline into Trump. Trump seems to respect him enormously and consult him, I mean, if not directly, by watching his show and absorbing and then acting on a lot of what Hannity says. So Hannity, all of a sudden, instead of just being some guy on TV who sells products, he's that guy on TV who sells products, and he's the advisor of the president.
Well, in a Trump presidency, isn't that perfect? That's exactly what you would expect. That he would have his favorite talk show host as one of his advisors.
I mean, there is a weird thing about Trump, and that is that he has strong opinions on stuff that he doesn't know anything about. For example, the Iran nuclear deal. I love that this is the worst deal ever. The Iran nuclear deal is the worst deal ever. Now, I don't know how you feel about the Iran nuclear deal, but I can promise you one thing.
I haven't read it.
Right.
I have no idea.
You and Donald Trump, Donald Trump hasn't even had it summarized for him. I mean, I promise you that Trump couldn't tell you one thing that bothers him about the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, a specific thing.
No, again, there's no way I'm going to endorse lots of the opinions he has or his flip-flops or whatever. All I know is I wanted a big wrecking ball in Washington. I wanted both parties smacked in the head. And he's doing that.
Yeah.
And so I'm amused and pleased because I hate Washington politics. I hate both parties.
Right.
And there are very few guys who could have pulled this off. And there isn't going to be this is the only time in my life I'm going to get to enjoy this.
Well, the only
probably in 4 or 8 years there'll be some other old line hack who plays by the rules, and everything will go back to what was acceptable and normal.
The problems you talk about in California politics, they're just as bad, if not amplified further, in Washington. In terms of political monies and favors. I'm talking about lobbyists, monies, things bought and paid for.
That's what I said before. I think the whole system is busted, and I'm ready for an emperor.
And I hear you on that. I worry about this guy surrounded by hawks now. Everybody from Bolton to Pompeo it goes on and on. I mean, and he is easily shaped in terms of his worldview, right? Since he doesn't know anything. I worry that we make it to the next guy a little bit. Do you think that that's a legitimate worry or not?
He doesn't seem to be oriented towards war. He seems to find it stupid and a waste of money.
He celebrates the military, of course, right?
He celebrates the military, but he celebrates it in the way people did coming out of World War II. It's an old-fashioned celebration of the military. It's not the George W. Bush crowd that thought we should use the military to try to control foreign countries, to get them to live our way or to provide us with some kind of strategic advantage. Going into Iraq, I think going into Iraq was so horrible and costly and deadly that I think that is what's imprinted on Trump. It's like, we're not going to do that. But he'll deal with a direct threat. If Kim Jong-un actually fired a missile at us or one of the allies, I think Trump would go in full bore and probably drop a nuke on his head.
Well, Kim Jong-un isn't going to drop anything. You know that.
I think he's already backing off, and I think that's real.
Yeah. You're a great listener. I love listening to
you.
And it's really a pleasure to have you here.
It was a lot of fun coming on, and let's do this again sometime.
Let's do it again. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, John. Hope you enjoyed our conversation with John and our weekly conversation with Michael Shure. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for all the ways you show us love. Until next time, bye-bye.
Hey, everybody, why don't you do me a favor and like The Edge with Mark Thompson on Facebook? Yeah, that's going to bring in the kids.
Edge-show.com. Edge-show.com. The hyphen is stupid. Edge-show.com.